And then on top of that, when you get it, especially for our nation of people, you ain't gonna have the people from all of the other nations flocking to your restaurant, man. Right? You're not going to have, and I'm just going to come out and say it, you're not going to have the Caucasian coming to your restaurant like that. You're not going to have the Asian. You're not going to have the so-called Middle Eastern coming to your restaurant, man. The so-called Eastern Indian. Okay? You're not going to have the Japanese, the South Korean, okay? The people from Thailand coming to your restaurant, man. You're not going to have the so-called Jewish coming to support your restaurant. Why? Because you're under the curses, man, as a nation of people, man. Right? You're not supposed to be lucrative like that in this society. Okay, if you're truly serving the Most High, you're not going to have a lucrative business like that. You got to be into all sorts of sin. Okay, you got to be a part of the so-called Boule society to be successful in this society, man. And that's no BS. The book of Sirach, which is also known as the book of Ecclesiasticus, in the Apocrypha, which is also known as the hidden books of the Holy Scripture, chapter 12, and we're going to go to verse 3. And it read, now as you can see here, this is sort of written in like Old English right here, right? But I don't think this is too hard for y'all to read, but here we go. Verse 3 from the top. There can no good come to him that is always occupied in evil. All right. Nor to him that giveth what? No alms. All right. So the Most High is clear here, man, in the book of Sirach, chapter 12, verse 3. There can be no good come to him or her that is always occupied in evil. Okay. Now, what's that evil? That's not necessarily talking around just going around being a bad person, cursing people out or starting fights or whatever, starting bar fights or whatever. That's talking about the wickedness, right? Serving other gods, right? You're into Hinduism. You're into Buddhism, okay? You're into Islam. You just came off keeping 40 days of Ramadan, right? You took a trip to Mecca to kiss that Kaaba stone, which is idolatry, okay? All of the stuff, you're into evil witchcraft, right? Hating your own brethren and sister, right? That's what you call evil. Also, not giving your alms, not giving your tithing, okay? Not doing your charity, your so-called philanthropy, all right? That's what you call evil. Nor to him that give no alms, all right? Verse 4. And this, like I said before, the Most High, he's precise in who to give to, right? As it says here, give to the who? The godly man, all right? Who's the godly man or woman? The ones who's keeping the laws, statutes, and commandments, right? And help not a sinner. Okay, who's the sinner? That's the 2/3. The ones who's not keeping the law, statutes, commandments of the Most High. The ones who just came off of keeping 40 days of Lent, right? 40 days of Ramadan in Islam, okay? They're practicing wicked witchcraft, all right? Serving other gods, believing in Shiva, Krishna, Madhava in Hinduism, believing in Buddha in Buddhism, and Fuchsius, okay? The beast himself in religious Christianity and Roman Catholicism, right? That's the sinner. Verse 5. Do well unto him that is lowly, which is humbled, right? But give not to the ungodly. Hold back thy bread, okay? So hold back your bread from the sinners, man. Don't strengthen the hands of sinners, right? And give it not unto him, lest he what? Overmaster thee thereby. For else thou shalt receive twice as much as evil, right? You're going to receive evil from the person, which is the sinner that you help, and plus you're going to receive curses from the Most High for helping the sinner, right? For all the good that thou shalt have done unto him, right? So all of the blessings that the Most High was supposed to give to you for helping the godly people, the ones who's keeping the laws, statutes, and commandments, the ones who's ending the Feast of Unleavened Bread tonight, which is the 7th day, right? All of the blessings that the Most High was going to give to you for helping that person, he's now going to give to the evil person, and then you're going to get the curses, right? And then on top of that, he's going to put the spirit in that sinner to overmaster and overthrow you too, right? So the Most High is serious about this, man, right? So this is the reason why you have to help the less fortunate, okay, and the so-called poor. Because really, we all poor as a nation of people. We're at the bottom of the totem pole. No matter how much money you got, we still hate it in this society, okay? We're still behind enemy lines, right? We're still in captivity and servitude, paying tribute onto Caesar, right? So you're still poor. You don't have your own nation, right? You don't have your own car dealerships, major car dealership. I haven't seen not one of our people, so-called Negro, so-called Hispanic, so-called Seminole Indian, never saw no one with their own major car dealership, right? Never seen no one with a GM dealership. Never seen no one with a Ford Motor Company dealership, right? Not even a Kia dealership, right? Let alone Nissan, Toyota, and Honda, okay? Mercedes-Benz, BMW, forget about it. Audi, forget about it. Range Rover, forget about it, right? Land Rover, really, right? And then you have to think about it. How are all of these places staying in business? Okay? See, these are the little things that goes over our people head without thought, man. Right? So we like to say as a nation of people, we're succeeding in this society, right? We're coming up. We're moving on up, right? Just like the Jeffersons, right? But where have you seen an all, I ain't going to say just black, just like I said, this goes for all of us, man, who's of the nation of Israel, which is the so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Seminole Indians, man. I haven't seen that one major car dealership owned by one of us. No Ford Motor Company car dealership, no GM dealership, Cadillac, right? No Nissan, no Toyota, no Honda, okay? No Land Rover. Forget about Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Audi. We ain't even going to see those places, not in this society here, right? Don't see none of those places owned. Now, the people that do own it, how are they keeping these places in business, right? How are they keeping these places in business, right? How is the Ford Motor Company up the road from me and the GM dealership down the road, the Nissan dealership down the road from me? How are those places staying in business? I don't see hundreds of people walking up in there on a daily basis buying cars, man. I don't see it. So how are they staying in business, right? But when you have somebody from our nation of people who happen to come across a little bit of money and have their own little used car dealership, they don't stay in business for long. You know why? Because we're not getting the credentials. We're not getting the grants as these other places getting. The nation of people, man. But us, if we tend to get a little business like that, a little car dealership or whatever, a little restaurant or what have you, it's not going to stay in business for long if we're not making any sales. If we ain't selling no cars, that place is going to go out of business without question, right? But you have these other major car dealerships, Ford Motor Company, Nissan, GM, Toyota, Honda. They all remain in business year after year after year after year. And it's not like I see hundreds of people going in these places buying cars, man, for them to stay in business. The same thing goes for those little antique shops, those little boutique shops that be in them small towns, right? That's in my local town in general. How are all of these places staying in business? They're not getting any business. No one's going in those places buying all of these ancient furnitures, these ancient boutique furnitures and antiques, whatever, all of these little pictures that they have up in there, those little paintings that no one wants, right? How are all of these places staying in business? No one's flocking in there on an everyday basis buying all of this stuff. But somehow they stay in business, right? These are the things that fly over our people's heads, man. And we don't think about these things, right? But we wonder why our business is shut down after a year or so, because we're not getting a lot of business. There's no clientele being spread abroad about our business to give us service, right? We wonder why our, anything that's concerning restaurants or whatever, which I think is failed opportunities. I think if you're going to open business, the best businesses to open up is like a car wash or a laundromat, right? Those are the two things that's never going to go out of style, man. Everyone's going to always need their clothes washed. Everyone's going to always need their car wash, man. But a restaurant, you have to be special, right? You have to have some great tasting food, or someone have to really be exalting your business in order for a restaurant to stay open, man. And then on top of that, when you get it, especially for our nation of people, you ain't going to have the people from all of the other nations flocking to your restaurant, man, right? You're not going to have, and I'm just going to come out and say it, you're not going to have the Caucasian coming to your restaurant like that. You're not going to have the Asian. You're not going to have the so-called Middle Eastern coming to your restaurant, man. The so-called Eastern Indian. Okay, you're not going to have the Japanese, the South Korean, okay, the people from Thailand coming to your restaurant, man. You're not going to have the so-called Jewish coming to support your restaurant. Why? Because you're under the curses, man, as a nation of people, man, right? You're not supposed to be lucrative like that in this society. Okay, if you're truly serving the Most High, you're not going to have a lucrative business like that. You got to be into all sorts of sin. Okay, you got to be a part of the so-called Boule society to be successful in this society, man. And that's no BS. Okay, if you're really paying attention to what's going on, the way this society is headed, this capitalist society, okay, you're not going to be lucrative in this society if you're into some sort of wickedness, if you're not into some sort of wickedness. All right, so that sort of boggles me how we always talk about opening restaurants, but if we don't have no support from our own people, then what other nation of people is going to come into your restaurant and support you to keep your business thriving? All right, unless you have a laundromat, unless you have a car wash, right, where everyone can use. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. So if you don't have certain businesses, then how are you going to stay afloat? And how are all of these other businesses staying afloat, right? Without any clientele, without any service on a daily basis, right? So this is something that our people have to think about, man. These are the things. You drive past that Ford company dealership on a daily basis. You drive past that Nissan dealership on a daily basis, and they still open. It could be year after year after year. They still open for business, right? But you could know someone who's of our nation of people who just opened up a car dealership, a used car dealership, like not even a year ago, and they already going out of business, closing it down because they don't have a lot of buyers, a lot of people coming in there purchasing their cars, man, and they don't have enough to pay the property tax on the land that they have their used cars on, right? So this is something to think about, man. But it flies over our people's heads on a daily basis, man. Why? Because they're not concerned, or they just blinded. Okay, as it says here, verse 6. For the Most High hateth sinners, and will repay vengeance unto the ungodly. Okay, so if you're not keeping the 7 days of unleavened bread, you didn't keep the Passover, okay, you didn't keep the new moon as the beginning of the new year for you, which is the month of Abai, all right, you didn't keep the Sabbath, okay, this is what the Most High says, man. For the Most High hateth sinners, and will repay vengeance unto the ungodly, and keepeth them against the mighty day of what? Their judgment, okay, and punishment. All right, so the Most High is plain, man.